From the plasma frontiers comes Fraz, the plasma tier, with its illustrations of the future.
Yeah, we got Cleve and Joe and myself, Raz. We're working on schematics. We're working on kind of hammering out some of the designs. And I'm going to bring up a picture of the, oops, that ain't right. I lost everybody.
We're still
Sorry
here.
about that. Yeah, we'll try again. It's like I just disappeared. Every screen went blank, and we'll try again. As I say, as techno monkeys go, sometimes with the Zoom stuff, I'm all not that good yet. We're going in to pick up a photo, and I'll come up in just a second.
We got you.
Okay, I'll zoom in. Basically, the rook structure or the static core is going to remain the same. The antenna in the middle is the same. The plastic coat around the outside of the antenna is the same. The GANs on the inside of that plastic tube is the same. The GANs on the copper wire on the inside around the plastic tube and inside the copper pipe is the same. The GANs is in the secondary layer around the coils to the outer shell of the inner shell of the copper pipe is the same, CH3. We have not changed anything along that design. This step is strictly going to be hooking up the maggrav coils to the static core. And it took almost like a bit of courage to put it down on paper. And it's like on our last video, we talked about why do we get to this point and then we shy away or do it wrong. We sabotage it. So anyway, the outside of the copper tube, and I'm going to draw that real quick with, okay, this is our copper pipe. And we're going to be starting from the copper pipe and work our way out. When I first thought about it, I put 3 copper rings on the outside of the copper pipe with the idea that when you do your capacitors and your batteries, because of the way the current flows, you have expansion and it has to contract underneath, expansion, contract underneath, expansion and contract underneath, that you may get at the bottom maybe 0.5 volts, you may get 0.7 volts, and you may get 1 volt or 1.2 at the top, theoretically speaking. After that idea, with the 3 the same as copper bands, and there are washers or just wraps of copper wire, remind you that everything in this system has to be nano-coated. Nothing goes in that isn't nano-coated. From the top outside copper ring, that would go to the gravitational inside coil of the maggrav. And that is basically the copper going to an iron. And I'm going to confuse everybody right at first, and then I'm going to go how I got to the next step. The next one, the copper band, would go to the center core of the spring, the center spring, which would be the gravitational, and that would be the copper core of the second one, which would be, this is A at the top, B in the middle, C in the bottom. So we kind of, for designators, we know which ones we're talking about. We go from the top to the gravitational on A, we go from the middle one to the gravitational on B, and we go from the middle to the gravitational of C, which happens to be a zinc wire. The idea was we'd be setting up an infinity loop, and an infinity loop, and an infinity loop. What I realized after I got that far is that I'd set up my infinity roots,
Excuse me,
loops.
Frazzle.
Yeah.
C is supposed to be aluminum, not zinc.
Oh,
Right?
I'm sorry, aluminum. Correct. Right. So anyway, A, B, C. So aluminum. I just ate lunch, so I'm a little brain dead. Anyway, so then I was going, well, we need to have two circuits, and that really isn't much of a circuit. It bonds, but you're basically, when we look at the charge on the outside edge in the middle of the copper, it's negative. So it goes negative over and negative back. Yes, there's a connection, but we can do better. You see. So I changed my mind about connecting them in the middle straight across. So having three wires coming out of the middle, and decided that we were going to set up the jewel ringer circuit in a more classical way, in the usual way. There's no dead ends, there's no ending cul-de-sacs and that kind of stuff in the circuit. It's all nice circles because plasma travels in circles when it's happy. I then took a look at the center of the top one. That's steel. If I go from copper to steel, that's kind of backwards. So I decided to extend the steel wire around the top and get rid of the copper washer or the copper ring at the top of the tube. So that one is steel. Second here, change color. That's steel. Steel. Iron wire, whatever. The second one, change color. And we're going to use red this time. And since the inside of the mag grab right there, that one is copper, that one could be copper. But we're not going to connect it. We're going to leave it open. There's going to be a gap in there. Change color. And let's go with green. The next one is the aluminum. The mag grab down here has aluminum. So we put aluminum over here. But we're not going to connect it. We're just going to let it sit there. We still get, when this thing's charged up, these same infinity loops because we are changing the dynamics of the wire that's inside the magrav coils compared to the copper bands around the copper tube. And if you take a look at it, we're actually loading the system opposite. Let me get the other infinity loop in here. So we go from copper to steel to copper to steel. From, let's see, I think I had a highlighter. Yeah. No, I mean a spotlight. There it is. In this area here is copper. It goes, I should say steel, goes into steel. But in the plasma thing, it goes from copper of the pipe to copper to steel of the washer, which is actually the inner core wire. It has to go past the coil, which is copper, to get into the inside, which is steel. So we actually have a better plasma flow in infinity because it's slightly dissimilar, and it gives the plasma a chance to do the looping. And let's see if I can slow way down so it shows up at your end. Okay. Now, clear all. So what happens, and I'll use the green color. Back to my pen, go to green. Green is going to be our gravitational at this point for, well, it's the return. So it comes from the steel wire, goes into the center of the one end of the magrav on the inside, And there might be a right or a left direction through that we'll have to take into account when we get into actual building so that the plasma flows the right direction. We want whatever direction let's see, this is easy to figure out. Plasma is going right now, for example, that direction in the outside coil. We want
It'd be for the same shape as the infinity loop as the band, wouldn't it?
Yeah, you want it to basically travel the other. So basically, it's going to go the opposite direction. And it'll take a little bit of thought. How and as I told Joe, a lot of times when I design stuff, it's upside down, and sometimes it's backwards, and that's just because of my dyslexia. But the main idea is just trying to get it in the right order. It's like my grade school teacher says when we were learning how to spell, well, you've got all the letters for the word correct. We just have to get them in the right order to have the word spelled right. So we start with the steel wire at the top. It comes around, goes through the center in the gravitational, which is steel to steel, goes down, plugs into the copper of the B coil, comes out, goes down, plugs into the aluminum of the C coil, returns and connects to the plastic sheath that's over the top of the antenna, just like you do a capacitor. No different. Exactly the same. The copper, which would be the magnetical current, the inside coil that runs up through the inside of the pipe is the same. That's the same. It connects to the A maggrav, and that goes actually clear out and around and back. We're doing a cross-section of the maggrav. Goes down to the B, which is the magnetic coil of B, goes down to C to the magnetical, comes around, bypassing the other wire, and hooks into the bottom of the spring on the inside. So you have the magnetic going that way, and probably the gravitational, in reality, going that way. It's in that direction. Why is this important? Erase all. We'll go find another drawing, and then we'll come back to this. But that is basically the wiring as I see it right now, and it sets up one loop through the system this way, which is gravitational, and one loop through the outside, which is magnetic. Your your static core is the same as what's on the jewel ringer. We're using the antenna down through the middle to actually ping the circuit. If we need more voltage, if we have to amp the voltage up, we'll deal with that on another circuit, but this one has to be tested as is. Do not pass the next step without getting this step done first. We have to have an actual model to see if the hypothesis works.
All right, I just want to make something clear so people don't get a misunderstanding. We're not adding a battery into this. We're just looping it back into itself with the GANs, correct?
Correct. When you take a look at the static core, it really does act like a battery. It's got a micro amp or micro voltage ping that could get pretty hellacious if we get it set up right.
Okay.
So working with very, very small voltages at this point is a wonderful thing, because if we get it right, it's only going to take a millionth of a volt, basically the photon of thought, to get it to work. We're multiplying we're basically using a massive step-up transformer for plasma. And if we get it right, it's going to take just a little ping to get it to work. Okay, stop share of that one. And let me see if I can find the other drawing. And this is basically, in many ways, the earlier drawings on the toroid fields as we were explaining it is a little bit deceptive, but it helps with understanding how these systems work. And let's see if I've got something I can work with. I think I drew that one on the screen. Well, let's use the jigger. That's just my favorite little prop. It's not for bows anymore. Basically, the jigger represents our static core. It was, I've got marked in red, and it would have an antenna down through the middle, with the ground at the bottom and the tip up on top. When it sets up the vortice on the inside, the antenna almost works like a swivel stick in that it spins around, forming the vortice that goes in. We talked about the notion that when we look at the toroid vortices, the toroid field that forms because of the vortices, we have that shape, and it starts to look like this. And if we were looking at a magnetic field, all those red lines would be iron shavings, iron filings, and they would move away from the spaces and congregate on the lines. Now, in our earlier video, we talked about a vortexes, not only to having one that formed in the middle, like a little tornado in the middle, right there. We also said that to get the vortex to form inside the jigger, we had to have a vortex tornado on the outside, which looks like a swivel stick. It spins around and around and around and around. This is where we're going to expand our understanding of what that swivel stick really is, because it's more than just a stick. And we're going to erase all. We're going to draw back in our fields, or toroids. And what we have, if I change color, we will have, let's see, what color shall we use? We'll use pink. In our expanding, in our magnetical field, it fills in this one, okay, and it expands. So it's got this outward progression from the inside outward and expanding, and the same, exactly in the same ring the other way. And it fills in this space of iron filings with iron filings, and it leaves the open space. And I'll draw a few more bands now. It's our magnetic field. There's our pink one. Now remember, the pink one is going out from the top in the middle, out into the outer, away from the jigger. At the same time, we're going to use green. We have the gravitational. The gravitational, I'm going to draw, basically is coming in from the top. Move my, oh, okay, it's not going to. From the top, and it's moving inward. Inward. And the reason why your iron filings line up perfectly on both sides, they don't look like dog hairs or a comb in there, they actually look like they're little rods going, it creates a bigger rod, is that you have this current counter current going on at the same time. You have your magnetical, which is expanding, coming out in pink, and your gravitational coming in. And the same thing happens at the bottom. You have, at this time, you have your gravitational coming out at the bottom, and your magnetic, my color, coming around and returning into the bottom, like so. So you have a toroid forming of one style, an expansion, like that, and you have a collapsing field of gravitational. Get my colors. Okay. Out the outside, coming around and going in. Coming out and going in. And it's the interaction of those two fields running in opposition to each other that sets up the lines that we see with our magnets and our magnetic fields. The same forms when we do water, the same thing forms when we do air or any other thing that has a toroidal formation. In addition to that simple motion, the fields are not only just going in the gravitational out from the bottom and coming in and down, which basically keeps you attached to the Earth, they're also coming around and looping in a figure 8. I change to the pink, and it's coming in a figure 8. It runs through the toroid so that it ends up coming in at the bottom on both sides and going out at the top. It's a little confusing, but it works out in 3-dimension, which is just slick. Gravitational coming in and out at the bottom. It doesn't matter. It's always going out at the bottom and coming in at the top. And your magnetic coming out of the top and in at the bottom. Out of the top, in at the bottom. Out of the top, in at the bottom. So why is this important? Keep that in mind. We're going to go back to our other drawing. Which is going to be that photo. Oops, wrong one. Excuse. Oh, I guess we can use this one. In this one, remember, we have a set of coils that actually go all the way around. That's your A coil. It goes all the way around with the static generator. Static is in the middle. Static generator. And change. And the first one would be iron. The next one is going to be copper. And the second maggrav is going around in the middle all the way around. And the third one, the aluminum one with a core in it, it goes all the way around in the middle, like so. In our toroid fields, we have our, let's see, our big ink pen. Does that work? Size of my pen bigger. Remember, on our wire from the inside coil of the inside of the pipe, that coil, that spring on the inside, our field comes out, magnetical, comes around and comes in the bottom. Comes out of the top, in at the bottom. Our gravitation, green, goes the opposite direction. It's coming out of the bottom. Pen color green, bigger. It's coming out of the bottom and running up to the top and coming in that way. So it's in opposition. the idea is when we get this thing running, that it actually comes out of the top.
I just need to clarify something, if you could, please.
Sure.
What are we wanting, right-hand turn or left-hand turn on the spring? Just to make sure. So if this
off the top of my head, just because I'm sitting here thinking on the fly, I don't know.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
We got time to get to that. I wanted to bring that up in case somebody tries to ask that.
Right. At this point, I don't know. I'm under the impression that we keep it all, the outside coil and the inside coils are all the same direction.
Okay.
So
red then.
You know, if for convention, your magnetic coils are what hand?
Right hand, counterclockwise is how
Okay.
Cash Foundation they call it.
Okay, and then your gravitational will be left hand. So everything that's going to be on the
Oh, hang on. Sorry, I might have that wrong. I misunderstood the question.
okay, by convention, your magnetic is going to be right hand or left hand.
Don't know. I'm still out to
Can I?
debate on that one myself. I can't see that there's a real difference yet.
Well, from what I understand, everything's being wound left-handed. Everything's being wound
Mhm.
left-handed.
Except for gravitational, which goes into the lead GANs, which is right.
Yes, that was the only one we talked about. Yes, is
Okay.
right hand on the
Sorry,
this
antenna.
I think you called that back to front inadvertently too. You said left hand, Joe?
Yeah, well, I'm just going by the basic mag rev that when they wind them, everything goes to the left.
Yeah, they're right hand, mate. They're
No, they're right hand, but they wind to the left.
Yeah, I said we don't want to get bogged down in this at this point, but if we say that you just take a look at the one that's going to be going to ground, which goes into the lead GANs at the bottom.
It's clockwise.
That one is clockwise.
That's
Looking
right.
at it just right down into it. It would be like,
which is
if you put a screw into the ground, you would wind it into your coil just as if you were putting a screw into the wood.
Yes.
So it's clockwise.
Yeah, just like that.
Yeah, the screw into the wood. As it can get, and when we get down to really getting into the nitpicky portions of it, and in a way, it really truly is important. So you don't have any. It isn't working against itself. The plasma, you keep all the swirls going, and you might even find that there's a difference in hemispheres, whether you're in the northern hemisphere or the southern hemisphere. I don't know, haven't gotten that far, but I do know that we do have problems with some of our systems that seem to work in the northern hemisphere, but they don't seem to work in the southern hemisphere. Some of them work in 60 cycles and they don't work at 50 cycles. So their longitudinal, latitudinal location may make a difference, but for theory, which we're working on right now, we're just going to stay with when you wind your maggrav coils for the three maggrav coils, you're going to wind them exactly the same as you do your maggrav coils for any other electrical system. They're going to be exactly the same. We may end up with a difference of opinion right here in the middle. But I did some mental push-ups on it, and I went, I think we can just swap the wires and we'll be fine. We don't have to worry about the actual curls. But when we get into fine-tuning, we may even look at how we wind the center maggrav coils. There may be a difference, but when I did the mental push-ups, I went, no, you've got to keep the gravitational on the inside and the magnetical on the outside. If you wind them the other direction, you're actually reversing polarity on the inside going against the overall structure. and you have to keep pattern the same. So at this point, for clarity, we're going to say for the maggrav coils on the outside, all three are going to be wound exactly the same as convention from the Kesh Foundation. No difference.
Okay, I just want to say
Now that to me is the right-hand thread.
Okay, Cleve,
Okay.
Cleve, since you worked the math out, do you want to give them the math on the coils?
Oh, you wrote it down though, Joe.
Okay, Cleve come out with a golden ratio number. We started at 81,
Okay, I
35,
agree.
216.
216. What was the middle one?
135.
Okay, I'll go along with that. Yeah, that was some of the numbers I was playing with too, so we're in agreement.
Okay.
Okay, excellent. When I started looking at plasma flow, and I was starting to wonder, are we pushing the cores backwards? There is a possibility, but at this point, I'm looking at having the top. Let's use a different color. So this, because the CH3 is in here, and we're going to kind of keep it going in the upward end of the system because the lead's at the bottom, the CH3 is going to be closer to the top. I marriaged, by convention of understanding, the ring at the top, which goes all the way around, to be all in the iron family. So we have the GANs on the inside, which is predominantly CH3 in the upper half of the reactor, the static core, and the top one of the coils to be the CH3 or an iron family. The next one is copper, and that's here, and it's copper there. And because they're not connected, we don't have a flow from one to the other causing a problem. We just basically have a plasma connection, infinity loop there, and that'll work itself out. The aluminum is at the bottom simply because the iron is at the top. So the aluminum, the green, is down here at the bottom, and it lines up with the ring at the bottom. And it's just so we have infinity loops going back that aren't crossed. I didn't like the idea of having an infinity loop that went up and then another one coming down and another one in the middle. It may work out that way later on, but at this stage, to keep it simple, we're keeping the iron and the iron matched. The copper.
Question, Fred.
And the copper, yeah.
When we're actually constructing this, we physically have the coils alongside the bands.
When we go to physically construct this, your top maggrav coil will be the smaller one. Your medium-sized one will be larger, and your third one at the bottom will be even larger. The diameters will be pretty much the same at this point. At a later date, we may even change the diameter of the coils themselves so that the smaller one, the one at the top, is smaller physically. The one in between, the diameter of the coil itself, the springs, are a little longer, so you'd use a larger one. And the bottom would be even larger. And my model that I've got started is built with 3 different diameters in mind already. That's where my head is right now.
So now we're looking at a cross section of the coils.
Correct.
The way they would sit. Thank you. That clarified it a lot.
Yeah. The idea is at the top of the pipe, we start to develop our first, oh, my batteries are dying, toroid here. And our second one underneath it, which will be larger outside. And our third one, which is even larger at the bottom. And what this does, it actually causes a plasmatic change on the inside that is decompressed at the bottom and compressed at the top. So you get more acceleration in the plasma field as you go to the top. As you zip past the iron on both sides, it speeds it up. We're using an inside and outside of a Joule ringer circuit as for the plasma, right there at the neck at the top of the, it looks like the kid's ring stacker. Looks very, very similar. And go ahead.
It's an upside down toroid too. So and you're creating a low pressure above it, which is lift.
Yeah, exactly. On the other hand, remember we had this toroid forming on the inside of your expansion, which is your magnetic. We also have at the same time your gravitational, oops, wrong color, green, gravitational, and that comes magnetic, the opposite direction. Spinning the opposite way. And we're concentrating the gravitation in a no-win solution. It comes in, but it is not, it's not expanding, it's collapsing. What am I saying about this? The gravitational field for flight, we're collapsing into a small toroid or a small vortice at the bottom, and it's trapped in a lead GaNs. When we take a look, we go back into the Tesla coil work, we put a capacitor with just one lead going to the capacitor on the primary coil. And the reason is we wanted to stop or dampen the RF frequency, which was going back and forth. We called it RF at the time. And we put a capacitor at one end, and so that when we pinged from our primary coil to our secondary, we jumped the spark gap, it filled the top of the Tesla coil, the collector dome at the top. And it did it at a specific frequency. There wasn't any aberrant frequencies running around in the wires, a residual RF field. Or basically what we're saying is we get rid of that AC in the middle, the effect of the AC. So as your gravitational is coming in, it comes into your antenna, it comes down and gets trapped in the lead at the bottom. That absorbs it. At the same time, it still has a rebound of sorts in the opposite direction because it's an AC circuit at that point. So in the middle of that, you have an AC going back up, and that is broadcasted out at the top of the antenna. It gets rid of it. This creates a vacuum of charge in the center, which allows another batch of gravitational signal or electrons to come in and get stuck in the lead again. Now the lead GaNs probably will act much like a capacitor in that it'll store it like your battery in your car does and then releases it. So you're charging and discharging your lead GaNs all the time, maybe thousands or hundreds of thousands of times in a second. When we add our Joule ringer circuit, which is basically the static core, we're adding the ferric core in there around the outside edge, what this does is it causes the frequency of this in and out from the top to slow up because it has to fill up the demand of the ferric core. But the ferrite core also releases it energetically. I mean, it's like we have it and it's gone, and that energized core then feeds the rest of our circuits. So we're basically setting up a really low voltage, low amperage battery system inherent because of all the dissimilar metals that are in place, plus the natural AC that forms because of the antenna to ground situation. It basically powers itself by picking up the fields in the area. This comes in, part of it is stuck, the rest of it blasts back out, and it leaves a vacuum. The inside of your antenna, remember you have your antenna where the knob on it comes down and it goes to ground. There's that plastic sheet around it. It's a little tube. That is filled with a little bit of alkali, maybe a little bit of tinfoil aluminum, just a little tiny speck of it, and your gans of urine, which is similar to your lymph, is on the inside. That's sealed up. That's going to get energized by those electrons and photons or whatever is going down through the antenna to your ferrite core, which is on the outside of that ferrite. That's your H3, and your hemoglobin is on the outside of that. And in that particular, you've got your copper wire, which is your pickup, which is magnetic, is winding up through that and going out to your bag grabs and back up into the bottom. And then your copper pipe is on the outside of that. So, and then your rings are on the outside of that. You have your steel ring. Let's see if I got some of the color. Black, maybe? Steel ring at the top. Steel wire at the top. We have copper in the middle. It'll draw, there it is, the copper. And we have the aluminum at the bottom. So we are building up as much different potentials that when you add them up from the center to the outside of the static core, it also gets bumped in order through the maggrav coils on the outside because of the similarities of in A, B, and C to your center static core. It basically sets up a huge infinity loop around and through the two. Actually, like so. What a mess. Erase all. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing.
This is brilliant. This is brilliant, Raz. It's brilliant. It's amazing. Really is.
So that's, as I said, I was very, very excited here a little while ago when I called up Joe and I says, I think it finally gelled all the pieces in the three-dimensional, in the right order, in so that all adds up. Now we're probably going to have some fine-tuning. That's what R&D is all about. But we get the idea, the concept down first, and then I run it past you two who have more experience in the different facets of the circuitry and in the flows of stuff, and see if you agree with what I have dreamt up is a possibility, and we go from there. And then you pick it apart and you say, well, it's not going to work there because there's some clashes, and that's perfectly okay.
All right, you want me to
Joe,
or you want me to keep going?
Keep going. You go ahead and rip a little bit. See what you.
Okay,
let's have a thought.
I just need you to clarify because these questions are going to come up. All right, we know the steel's coming out of the coil and the aluminum's coming out of the second coil, correct? Or are we going to keep them separate on the center coil? On the center ring.
Let me pull up the picture and we'll go through that one more time.
Because I want to make sure they know if they're nano coated, but we know that if
everything is nano coated.
Okay.
Nothing goes into the system that is not nano coated.
The outer shell
plastic
being nano
is
coated too on the pipe.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Everything is nano coated. There's nothing goes in the system that is not in plasma state. The copper wire goes to copper wire. It comes from the inside of the static core and goes out through the copper wires of the maggrav on the outside and back into the center copper coil. They're all hooked together. It's all the same color. In this drawing, it's pink. We get into some metal confusion, but it's by design when we look at the gravitational wires inside the maggrav coils that are on the outside of the circuit, in that the top maggrav, which we are calling A, has an iron wire core.
Yes.
That tag end of that iron wire core actually comes out of the center of that maggrav coil and wraps around the copper pipe at the top of the copper pipe on the outside of it. It's very similar to picking up the negative ground on a capacitor. You say, okay, we're going to bind from the center of the capacitor up to the positive end from them. We're doing very similar to that in this orientation. The next maggrav, number B, letter B, which is in the middle, that's that one up there, that has a copper core. And because we're going to 3 different metals, we're trying to do a gradient from one to the next one to the next one, from the most heavy of the gravitational, which is where it goes in at the top, to the lighter in the middle, to the lightest, which would be the aluminum at the bottom. Okay. The bands that are on the inside, originally I had all copper. So C is going to be aluminum on the outside. On the inside, my original was 1, 2, 3, all being copper. That may have to be. But at this point, because I really like the idea of the dissimilar metals and stuff in place, I had iron. At the top, we have the copper, which is the red line in the middle, and green, which is aluminum, and it's just a band. You can use a piece of aluminum wire, or you can use aluminum washer, or a copper wire or a copper washer, a steel washer at the top, or a steel wire, but I'm liking it. But what's interesting is when we bring the gravitational back, we don't bring it back to the outside of the copper pipe. We actually bring that down and wrap it around the plastic tube that's around the base of the antenna.
And hence,
I may be wrong.
No, you're right. That's a capacitor. That's brilliant.
It's a capacitor.
And then you got to run it between the other GANs when it shoots up. It's picking up the power again. You're right.
Okay, that's the only thing that I said. I after I did my first one, which I had connections straight across, and straight across, I went, that's okay, but it isn't multiplying. That's just 1 to 1. I want 1 to 2, 1 to 4, or 2 to 4, or 2 to 8 in my multiplication. I want the most multiplication that I can get. And so I moved the wire down to this capacitor position on the plastic tube so that the GANs is getting activated by the gravitational. But what we're doing is we're bringing that gravitational just smack down and trapping it in the lead GANs at the bottom.
Frazzle, that's why you are called the plasmateer, because you can see this in your mind. This monkey here is amazed. You made it so simple. The last few ones they weren't that bad. They were everything was doable, but every time you get into it even more, you just bring it down more and more into a really super simplistic system.
Okay. Cleve, what's your thoughts on this?
Mate, I was a little bit wondering how we could utilise your knowledge last time, after the last big one, how we were actually going to put it into practical terms, but you've done it.
Okay.
and in what, 2 hours or something?
Yeah. I got the coconut to crack in the sun. I didn't have to get out the big hammer and beat it. It cracks.
That's for you, monkey. You good monkey.
Oh, good. I need a banana. I have fried my brain so hard today. It's like that when we okay. I think we're through with
Turn off
the recording. I want to thank everybody. If there's any other questions, you guys, we're just going to BS here for a minute.